Okay. And we're just so happy to be introducing Paul Selbst on the fourth lecture on politics and religion in America. Paul, you're on.
Thank you, Diane. Good morning, folks. We are starting a couple of minutes late, which is because of technical problems, which is better than it's been in the past. So I guess we should be blessed. Things are getting improved. Anyway, yes.
I want me to turn out the light, but I
Oh.
don't think you can see.
Okay. We're still working on.
Very well, Paul.
Okay. I think I need one light on.
Right, that'll have to be on.
Okay.
Okay, but apparently that mic's not coming through very well.
All right. Well, let's get right into class 4 of religion and politics in America. As usual, I have some material that I took from newspapers to talk about the last week's media treatment of politics in the country and how religion intersects with the politics. Here's a piece in no particular order. Here's a piece from the.
I can't hear you with your mic.
Oh,
A way to turn it up.
I have to turn it on. Testing. Okay, now you got me.
Yeah.
All right. Here's a piece from the Inquirer for the last week, talking about how religion and politics intersect. And in this instance, it deals with the University of Pennsylvania, and the faculty are protesting the power that the donors have in terms of affecting university policy, or in this case, the employment of the president, because the president was not sufficiently advocating for Israel recently, and I'm sure everybody remembers that incident in the congressional testimony. And because the president was not advocating sufficiently to satisfy some very large donors, they succeeded in convincing the board to remove her. Well, eventually she resigned, I guess. At any rate, organizers with the Progressive Jewish student group Pen Chavurah were threatened with discipline for screening a film critical of Israel. An incident that was followed by the abrupt resignation of the university's Middle East Center director. And the upshot of that is because of the influence of the Jewish donors, the president was summarily removed. Here's another one from the last week, and this one is about the homeless ministry of a church in Ohio, which filed a lawsuit after the pastor was charged with violating city ordinances when he opened up the sanctuary around the clock for homeless people and others to find shelter. Apparently, the city had a zoning ordinance that prohibited the church from providing sanctuary for homeless people, and the minister did it anyway. So there you have another example of politics, in this case, a city ordinance, fighting with the religious imperative to be humane to homeless people. Here's a piece from the Inquirer of a few days ago. Let's see. A congressional panel. Let's see. I have to figure out how to get this in focus. No, it's not, it doesn't work. A congressional panel asks Penn for information. The House committee, now here we're talking about Congress. The House committee seeks to know all reports of anti-Semitic acts or incidents and related documents and communication for the last year, since January 2021. Well, actually, several years. So they're asking Penn for information on behalf of Jewish students. And here's another piece by the editors of the New York Times talking about boycotting Israel. A writer on Israel-Palestinian issues was invited by the University of Arkansas to speak on the subject last year, and the state had imposed a barrier that prevented him from saying that he would sign a pledge to not boycott Israel on behalf of Palestinians. Arkansas and more than 24 other states have enacted laws that prohibit state contractors from engaging in a boycott. These laws are abridging the speech of those individuals, groups, and companies, and so represent a violation of their constitutional rights. In 1982, the Supreme Court unanimously agreed that nonviolent political boycotts were protected speech and could not be prohibited by government officials. And finally, this one now is a little abnormal, given what I've been talking about in the intersection of religion and politics, because this one comes from a poll by the Public Religion Research Institute, which found that Generation Z, teens and young adults, are actually not religious. So it's the fact that people are repudiating religion that makes them liberal and progressive, and that's what they found in this research poll. They're a generation of distinguished by diversity. This is Generation Z now. Tolerance, suspicion of powerful institutions, and opposition to organized religion. And in a funny way, that's another intersection. And here's I guess this is the last piece I have about Fishtown. Church bells are not inspiring everyone. A church restored the carillon as a surprise for the neighborhood, but not everyone is happy. So bells disturb people who then appeal to the city, that's the political part of it, to suppress the noise of these beautiful church bells playing songs. Okay, so there you have the latest information about what's going on between religion and politics. Let's see if I can now share the screen to get to the handouts for today. Let's begin with the modern principles of conservatism. I provided for you a statement of principles that came out this last year. Now, if I can figure out how to work this. I want to move. I want to scroll. Okay, I'm scrolling.
Turn off the, he can't read without it.
Oh, you're not gonna read them now, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We have a problem turning off lights here. All right, here's an excellent and authoritative statement that spells out the values and goals of the Christian right. Now, please know that today I'm going to spend most of this lecture talking about the Christian right and, to some extent, the political right that is not necessarily Christian. In the next class, I will be talking about liberal ideology. So today we're talking about ideology of the right, and particularly of the Christian right, which is dominating a lot of the policies and political activity that's taking place in the country. All right, so here is an authoritative statement to spell out the values and goals of the Christian right. I point out it comes from the Edmund Burke Foundation. And what you should know, if you don't already, that Edmund Burke in the 1770s, during the time of our American fight for independence from England, Edmund Burke was an Irish member of the British Parliament at the time, and he supported independence of the colonies. And he was the first person to spell out principles of political conservatism. And ever since then, his name has been associated with the ideology of political conservatism. Now, back when we were not talking about a swing toward Christian nationalism, which has been appearing lately, there have been political conservatives. When we were all young, political conservatism during the administration of Franklin Roosevelt had force. And since then, it's been in the news and in our political campaigns. But that kind of political conservatism was not particularly religious. It is what today we would call more libertarian. It harked back to the Constitution and to the attitudes and beliefs of the Americans who ratified the Constitution, that government should be limited, that rights should be granted to all citizens, that property should not be interfered with, that speech should not be interfered with, and that government regulation was kept to a minimum, and all those things, and America was basically self-supporting and self-governing, and there was a resistance to foreign alliances. So those conditions still pertain, and if you read this statement of principles, you'll see that the original kind of conservatism is voiced here. See, in the preamble, our traditional beliefs, institutions, and liberties have been progressively undermined and overthrown. And who are they talking about? Why, of course, the liberals. We see the tradition of independent, self-governed nations of the foundation for restoring a proper public orientation toward patriotism and courage, honor and loyalty. it's important that you pay attention to these words because these represent the moral basis on which conservatism rests. Patriotism, loyalty, religion, family are sacred, and traditional sex and gender roles are sacred, and the church and the religion that goes with it, sacred. We are conservatives because we see such virtues as essential to sustaining our civilization. And I mean, this is an ideology that is more powerful than just a bunch of beliefs, because they have a moral basis and represent values that cannot be compromised or overturned. We see such a restoration of these values as the prerequisite for recovering and maintaining our freedom, security, and prosperity. So if you understand that the religious right in all of its activities today has basically embraced these values, then you will understand why they behave as they do, except for the radicals. Now, the radicals are the people who are currently in Congress and legislatures and are doing things that seem to be confounding common sense. But if we look at the beliefs of true conservatism, it's here. So there are a number of principles that are affirmed and spelled out. So if we take national independence, self-government, and each country has a right to maintain its own borders and conduct policies to benefit its own people. No argument there. That's conservative. Rejection of imperialism and globalism. Again, that's traditionally conservative. National government, that's questionable because there's been a movement towards states' rights away from subordinating states to the national government. But these principles promote union, national government, rather than states. But the government is to be limited, and here's some language. We recommend a drastic reduction in the scope of the administrative state and the policy-making judiciary that displace legislatures representing the full range of a nation's interests and values. And they look at the federalist principle, which prescribes a delegation of power to the respective states so as to allow greater variation, experimentation, and freedom. Now here, numbers 4 and 8, numbers 4 and 8 make this statement different from traditional conservatism because these are more absolutely religious. God and public religion. No nation can long endure without humility and gratitude before God and fear of his judgment that are found in authentic religious tradition. The Bible has been our surest guide. And it's an orientation not only to God, but to the political traditions of the nation. We are now talking about what is called dominionism, which by another term is the kind of part of religious nationalism. The Bible should be read as the first among the sources of shared Western civilization in schools and universities, and as the rightful inheritance of believers and non-believers alike. where a Christian majority exists, as it does in America, public life should be rooted in Christianity and its moral vision, which should be honored by the state and other institutions, both public and private. At the same time, Jews and other religious minorities are to be protected in the observance of their own traditions, but of course, living under a Christian blanket. In the free governance of their communal institutions and in all matters pertaining to the rearing and education of their children. Please note that public education is going to be religious. Adult individuals should be protected from religious or ideological coercion in their private lives and in their homes. In other words, don't try to secularize anybody, buddy. The rule of law, traditional. Free enterprise, traditional. Public research, traditional. Family and children, religious. We believe the traditional family is the source of society's virtues and deserves greater support from public policy. The traditional family, built around a lifetime bond between a man and a woman, and on a lifetime bond between parents and children, is the foundation of all other achievements of our civilization. The disintegration of the family, including a marked decline in marriage and childbirth, gravely threatens the well-being and sustainability of democratic nations. Among the causes are unconstrained individualism that regards children as a burden, while encouraging ever more radical forms of sexual license and experimentation as an alternative to the responsibilities of family and congregational life. Economic and cultural conditions that foster stable family and congregational life and child raising are priorities of the highest order. That means, of course, equal rights amendment is taboo. Feminism is unacceptable, and it's not said here, but the traditional hierarchy of the family should prevail. Essentially, the father and husband is primary in control of the family. The wife is secondary, and the children should be seen and not heard. Where did these principles arise from? Going back to the beginning, look at the top, it says the Edmund Burke Foundation. So that is a foundation for conservatism. All right. Now, why is it that they don't like liberals? I think I've got something here I can quote from. I hope. Let's see. Well, I can't find it. I will seek to find what I can. All right, liberals are considered to be destroying the country. And they're considered to be naive. The whole tenet of conservatism is opposition to social engineering. Edmund Burke, when he originally espoused conservatism, made tradition the centerpiece. In other words, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that's the centerpiece of the conservative ideology. As we know from experience ourselves in our time, a lot of democratic programs, well, for example, Medicare, for example, Obamacare, have been instituted very fast and very widely. In other words, what conservatives would have done is taken more time, had an experiment in 1 or 2 states, ironed out the bugs, and then applied this to the whole country. That didn't happen. It didn't happen. Obamacare, for example, was a cautionary tale. It was enacted, and then it was applied to all 50 states. And there were many bugs in it. Social engineering, you see, is kind of a province of the democratic worldview. And it's repugnant to conservatives. They want to go slowly, they want to go specifically. It's not that they fight change, but they don't like the way it's being handled. They think it's naive on the part of liberals, and most of whom are Democrats, and consequently, they dislike that kind of change. Moving on, let's see what conservative politics look like. Oh yes, I think this is where I was seeking to find out why the Christian right doesn't like liberals. All right, let's start with the liberal left. Even though the religious left still exists, as most of the political activity associated with religion seems to come from the right side of the political spectrum. The chances are very good that you would not be reading this book, and that's where I did my research initially, if it weren't for the social movement known as the Christian right, a political uprising associated most closely with white evangelical Protestants, but also finding some support among conservative Catholics, traditionalist Protestants, and mainline dominations and Mormons. And my little addition here, you can add Orthodox Jews to this list of supporters. What is liberalism? The initial liberalism had a small L, and it was the liberalizing of the religious world by the Enlightenment. And so here are 6 tenets of Enlightenment liberalism from which American Democrats took much of their ideology. This is known now as classic liberalism. Individualism, the people rather than the community should be autonomous. And that, by the way, according to Edmund Burke, was the opposite. Burke decided that the family and the community were much more important than the individual. And many other countries have that kind of belief system as well, but not liberals in America, who believe that individualism is the highest priority to ensure our rights. Ownership of property, no argument there. Contracts and law affecting social obligations and government. Public policies are embodied in laws that are supposed to represent public interest, but they are also subject to public disagreement. Freedom from government restraints on an individual's, again, we're talking about individuals, on an individual's personal liberty or economic activities. That means do away with the Internal Revenue Service. This also means to increase opportunities for people to realize their human potential, and Democrats are right on top of that. This is contentious equality. All right, now maybe I need to define what is meant by three different kinds of equality: procedural, opportunity, or results. All right, procedural equality is what we have in America, based on capitalism. Everybody is not equal. Homeless people exist, people who don't have enough food, people who are out of work, people who don't have a decent place to live or decent health care. America has a lot of people who do not have these things. But America is considered to be a land of equality. Why? Because everybody has equal rights to serve in the military or to serve on a jury, or when you get to be 65, to receive benefits from Medicare. In other words, or be tried by a jury of your peers. That's known as procedural equality. Those are the rights that are laid out in the Constitution and in the various laws that are written to protect people. So in other words, if the city is supposed to not be able to take your property away for eminent domain without compensating you, and that sort of thing. Is we all have that kind of equality. Do we like it? Well, some of us are happy with it, and some of us don't like it. Some of us wish we were more socialistic. And socialism is equality of results. Everybody has health care. Everybody has a place to live. Everybody has a job, and so on. Okay? So that's why it's contentious. Socialism versus capitalism. Liberal democracy is mainly procedural democracy with mechanisms for citizen participation, but no guarantee of results. All right, these values, given them in all, are ambiguous. They can be defined in various ways, and they don't have specific standards to be flexible, to respond to changing demands. So then interest groups made up of liberals, but they're different liberals. You know, you can have a religious interest group, and you can have an educational interest group, and you can have a healthcare interest group. And their conflicting demands on government are what are called interest group liberalism. And whoever is most vocal and applies the most pressure is likely to get the benefits. The conservative position has been that the basic values of individualism, freedom, and property do have traditional and clear definitions. Okay, and here is what I was looking for earlier, the definitions of why the Christian right dislikes liberals. And of course, the Democrats are mostly liberals. The Christian right sees the liberal commitment to secular humanism as eroding basic American values and vital moral values. Before 1977, they were not organized because of their working class roots and because their religions favored no entangling alliances with secular society. But in 1977, around Jimmy Carter's policies, they came together as an interest group consonant with the tradition of American liberalism. They supported Ronald Reagan's election. They gathered strength and in numbers and in diversity. They opposed perceived corruptions of amoral liberal tolerance fostered by secular humanism. Now, there is a statement worth studying, but we won't have time to do that. a threat to this nation's survival, and they've become a powerful force in American politics. All right, so who are the religious right versus the Christian right? Those terms are not interchangeable. The religious right is a coalition of fundamentalists across several religions that take common positions on specific issues. Mainstream conservative Christians, Muslim social conservatives, Orthodox Jews, who all cooperate in projects through the World Congress of Families and the United Nations. They oppose birth control, gay rights, abortion, separation of religion and government, evolution. Oh, by the way, no, they don't. Not really separating religion and government, but I'll be talking about that more in an upcoming lecture. Evolution, yes. Embryonic stem cell research and changing moral standards. The fundamentalists are Protestant Christians who believe in personal piety and the strict and literal interpretation of the Bible, including its stories, doctrines, prophecies, and moral laws. The Bible is sufficient authority with which to govern society. Not all fundamentalists, however, are members of the Christian right, such as Mennonites, but mostly are fundamentalists. Charismatics, that's a term that applies to people who believe in that they are infused with divine grace and inspiration and gifts from the Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues, prophesying, causing miracles and faith healing. Not all charismatics, such as Roman Catholics, are in the Christian right, but Pentecostalists are, and they make up a large and growing segment of the religious population. Many of the Hispanic folk, whoops, I'm sorry, this goes crazy. Many of the people who are Spanish speaking from the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, for example, and Central and South America are Roman Catholic, but when they get to America, they convert to Pentecostalism. They become Protestants. I worked with such a woman in the past. Spreading the good news, evangelicals, public preaching and conversion, with emphasis on being born again and missions. Their goal is personal salvation. All right, this is what contrasts evangelical religious behavior from mainline Protestant behavior. Mainline being your traditional churches, Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran, Episcopalian, and so on, which they believe more in community and helping community, and that's where you find food banks and sanctuary safety and bake sales to raise money for education, or and so on. The folks in the mainline churches are known for being very community minded, whereas evangelicals are really more personal minded to avoid sin and seek salvation. And so there's much more individualism and less the community priority. Okay, and here we are, all the terrible things that the religious right believe America is being subjected to. A secularizing society captured by privileged, exclusionary, and arrogant elites. Anyone who believes yourself to be privileged, exclusionary, and arrogant, would you please raise your hand? Who believe themselves self-appointed and superior, and who neglect the middle class. They promote socialism in the name of humanism, which weakens individual freedom and initiative in the name of community. They tolerate and even promote immoral licentiousness and feminist goals that weaken families in their contempt for religious values. They have been soft on communism and national defense. They support internationalism at the expense of American superiority and leadership. They support multiculturalism at the expense of American values. They impose government regulation on individuals and businesses that weaken the economic structure. They deny biblical authority in matters of education and science. They have established secular humanism as a piece of civil religion in American life and government. This is testimony to the imperfection of human beings, which, by the way, conservatives believe in very fully. But God's word is perfect because the origin of the United States was God-given. This becomes a battle for the soul of the country and the triumph of the Lord. There can be no compromise or accommodation with adversaries. And there, my friends, you have a manifesto for Christian nationalism. I was thinking of copying this out and putting it on the mirror in my bathroom to ensure that every morning I look at it and ensure that I am none of those things. What are their aims? Populist conservatives and the Christian right are often allied on social issues such as prayer, abortion, traditional gender roles, and anti-taxation. They differ in matters of government actions and other social stuff and the militancy of their fervor, but when they cooperate, they leverage their combined power into mass political action, which is an exclusively white national movement. This is unprecedented in modern American politics. To have a major group that is so radical, representing a majority, lower middle class, and conservative population all at the same time. So if you want to know why Donald Trump's base is what it is, there you have it. Christian Reconstructionism. This is a movement that calls for Christians to put their faith into action in all areas of life. This leads to dominionism and Christian nationalism. Dominionism is influence or control over secular civil government by politically active Christians through political action. This is to establish a nation governed by Christians or a Christian understanding of biblical law. So those people who hate Sharia may love biblical law instead. This requires a theocracy, a union of church and state. Well, how many are there? Not certain. There's a significant voting bloc within the Republican Party. The Pentecostals alone are growing, especially with Latin American immigrants. There's been a decline in mainstream Protestant denominations and a greater growth in fundamental, charismatic, and evangelical denominations. And this is true. How do they affect public policy? Through political action committees, placing their own representatives in office and funding and campaigning for sympathetic public officials, legislators, governors, mayors, judges, lobbying, educational research foundations, publications, lawsuits, litigation, policy research and publication, religious television and talk shows, sermons in churches, with additional indoctrination and coordination of ministers. They indoctrinate prison inmates and college students. They educate lawyers who are members then of the Federalist Society, direct mailing for fundraising, grassroots organizing, supplying lawyers and staff for government agencies, and placing believers on school boards and internet blogging. I recommend that you reread that when you were done here, because this is exactly what's happening today, and you can see it happening, and Democrats are not doing these things. And if they want to really compete effectively with the Republicans, they better get started doing the same things. Have they been successful? Yes, alarmingly so. They are highly organized, aggressive, and focused, more so than liberals and moderates who are willing to live and let live. Okay, and then I provide for you in this lecture several looks at the teaching of evolution, creationism, intelligent design, contribution to militia movements. But I want to move along to religion and its priorities. And here are specific goals of the religious right. I've parsed them out for you. Issues of sexuality and reproduction. Opposition to prostitution, to pornography, to same-sex marriage, support for the nuclear family, opposition to birth control, to divorce, to the Equal Rights Amendment. Issues of human life, opposition to abortion, opposition to euthanasia, that is social killing, restriction of embryonic stem cell research, issues of the nature and degree of the separation of church and state, i.e. Christian nationalism, support for religion in the public sphere. The Bible, not the Constitution, should rule our governments. Support for the idea that America is a Christian nation, which is an idea that's a lot of people support. Intersection of religion and politics in America, which is what this course is all about. Promotion of liberal interpretations of the Bible as the basis for moral values and enforcing these by legislation. Yeah, that's religious nationalism. Reducing restrictions on government funding for religious charities and schools. Endorsement of faith-based charitable initiatives for the poor. Well, actually, mainline churches are doing that. Opposition to Wicca. Wicca is the religion of witches and other neo-pagan faiths. Opposition to judicial activism but only when liberal decisions are given. Then judges are activists. Strong support for national leaders who are publicly pious. That's why you'll never get an atheistic president. Opposition to legalization of marijuana. Issues of public funding and social development, opposition to federal funding of certain scientific research and the arts. They're trying to get rid of the National Council on the Humanities because they don't want arts to be federally funded. They don't consider art moral enough. Issues of education, support for school prayer, homeschooling, promotion of creationism, opposition to evolution, opposition to sex education, removal of offensive books, and that's happening as we speak. Strategy of election to school boards, and that's happening as we speak. Issues of national and domestic defense, strong support of that's where they put their money, into the military. America has the greatest military budget of a zillion other countries combined. Support of strong defensive and offensive strategies against communism, which at this moment is not a particular priority, but it was for years. Support of a strong military, support of the war against terrorism and These folks supported the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They want a war with Iran. They oppose gun control. They support police forces, anti-crime, anti-drug measures. No, thank you. No injection sites in my neighborhood. And they support imprisoning people rather than rehabilitating them. They oppose immigration that changes America's religious culture. And in foreign affairs, they support Israel. A lot of that is Christian belief of the end of that is the apocalypse, and you need an Israel in order to gain the apocalypse. Opposition to the United Nations, we see that. And in our last handout, we're talking about public opinion and right and centrist ideologies. Public opinion is a matter of identity. Partisan politics is polarized. If you know what somebody's politics are, you can pretty much know what religion they are and how religious they are. When politics becomes religion, it's easy to lose track of what an authentically religious voice in public life sounds like. Voters' religious commitments are the most powerful predictors of how they'll cast their ballots. Religion has long been a stand-in for culture and identity. Forget God for the moment. The fights carried out in its name often have less to do with God or theology than with ways of life, the culture wars. The most arresting evidence that identity, not faith, is driving politics is the behavior of two of the most devoutly Christian groups in the nation. White evangelicals were backing Republican candidates for Congress over Democrats by 75%. Black Protestants, on the other hand, were voting 70% for Democrats. How do we reconcile different dimensions of religion in politics? Religion is losing influence in public life. A lot of Americans believe that. They don't want churches in politics, but it's not churches in politics, as I've said before. It's people from churches who have internalized the religious message, and they're the ones who are in the interest groups, not the churches themselves. That's personal religious beliefs grounded in moral precepts. People distance themselves from their institutions, but not from the doctrines they've internalized. This can explain the rising support for Christian nationalism. Other aspects of public opinion. What is the appropriate role of government? Conservatives believe in limited government. They want to cut government programs. Liberal Democrats advocate for an active government and can increase government services and support on the basis of justice and humanity, that is, equality for disadvantaged Americans. Religious groups vary in their support of either position. The most supportive of an increased government role are Muslims, Hispanic Catholics, Black Protestants, Hindus, Jews, and Buddhists. Advocates of a reduced government role are people who are not religious, traditional Roman Catholics, mainline Protestants, evangelical Protestants, and Mormons. Some are swing voters between the parties, and that causes more ambiguity. All right, moral and cultural issues encompassing ideas about God, community, gender, sexuality, breaks down to progressive views versus traditional views. The preservation of family values plays a role here versus the progressive view that morals must be adapted to changing society circumstances. Women in the workforce is a contentious issue still. Out of wedlock childbirth, evolution, abortion, and gay or transgender rights. The culture war cuts across religious traditions and divides citizens into orthodox supporters with unyielding principles and progressive supporters with shifting standards. Social changes of the last 60 years have unnerved many Americans, but despite these disagreements, people do accept science on evolution. That is, more people do. Social justice issues, we have a pretty good idea what those are. And foreign policy, religious differences in this domain have been elusive. Opinions tend to be less permanent and less informed, and those pertaining to domestic policy questions. During the Cold War, communism was central. Since then, the Gulf War, the war on terror, the war in Iraq, and the war with the Islamic State have been somewhat supported. Military doves and hawks have fluctuated. What about public opinion overall? And this is the last word. While concerns about partisanship and polarization of Americans are still warranted, there are reasons to believe that it may be overblown, particularly by the media, whose economic model requires sensationalism and oversimplification of complicated reality. Yes, there are red states and blue states. There are believers in QAnon and other conspiracies, and Trump supporters. But the majority of Americans are decent people. If you're decent, hold your hand up. 2016 is behind us. This was borne out in the election of 2020, in which more normal political behavior was exercised than the pundits predicted. It's borne out by continuing efforts to accept and help immigrants seeking sanctuary. It's borne out by the number of women, Blacks, and other minorities being elected to political office in red states. It's borne out by more Americans accepting gays and transgender individuals and racial intermarriages and the legalization of medical marijuana and the introduction of food banks, soup kitchens, and support for affordable housing, and corporate executives, many of them with foreign names. Let's remain optimistic. And that's it for today's lecture. And in the next 2 minutes, if Diane is willing to give us a couple of questions or comments, I'll take them.
You are spot on with the time, Paul. Let's just say 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, can you give Wayne a mic? Thank you all for listening and for believing what I tell you.
Yeah, thank you.
You mentioned that a lot of it started during the Carter administration. I guess it's a reaction to other things. I'm just wondering, about these people. Did they feel threatened? Is that why they turned to this Christian nationalism?
Yes, many do. They feel threatened. They feel that America is going to hell. And it's all because of the naive social engineering of those liberal Democrats. They feel threatened, very much so. But here's the question. Does everybody here feel threatened by what the far right radicals are doing?
Yes.
So you get threatened, being threatened on both sides. And that is a cause of our polarization. Yes, anybody else? Joan?
It's interesting if you look back to the founders and what we started with. You know, separation of church and state. Everybody has a right to their own beliefs and religious practice.
Okay, yes, but initially there was no separation between church and state. When the federal government was formed in 1787, many states had no separation. The Puritans in New England didn't give any other religion any wiggle room at all. And you couldn't have a political position or even a leadership position in secular life if you weren't a Puritan. The Catholics in Maryland, Dutch Reformed in New York State. It didn't happen. You know, the Bill of Rights was not applied to the states when it was first ratified. It wasn't applied to the states until the 1780s. I mean, the 1790s. Years after the Bill of Rights was ratified in the Constitution, initially it only applied to the federal government. It did not apply to states. That came later.
Paul, thank you very much. And
Okay, thank you all for listening,
look forward to
Uh,
next week.
and hope to see you next week.
All right.